All right, so today is the start of our Q3 webinar, Hardening the User, and this is to help address regulatory compliance and risk reduction. So this continues our series that we've had over Q1 and Q2 of webinars to help educate around security and mobility, primarily so far this year. And today, our presenters will be myself, COO, Total Computer Solutions, and we have our CEO, Michael Collins, joining us today. So good morning, Michael.
Good morning.
Thanks for joining us this morning.
It's glad to be here.
So when we talk about hardening the user, what we really mean is dealing with the last line of defense. So over a lot of our webinars and our blog content that Michael and I have written so far this year, we focused a good bit on defense in depth. And really the user is sometimes the weakest link in that chain, but definitely the last line of defense. When we have all the security pieces in place, the different layers working, then we're relying on the end user doing their part. So that's what security awareness training is really about. And so hopefully the tips and content today will help users out there to be a bit more secure and safe in their day-to-day computer use. So we're going to talk about why does that matter, and then just some tips at a high level on adopting good security habits. And these will be really specific topics for end users that you can take with you, use day to day, and try to incorporate into your computer safe practices and help improve the security of your company. So what is security awareness training? So we know that there's cyber criminals out there always trying to take advantage of the trust, and really people oftentimes are just trying to be helpful, and that's where I think the greatest vulnerability is. People get an email with requesting a wire transfer, for example, and are just wanting to help out, so they're maybe quick to want to take care of that and move on to other things, and the attackers take advantage of that.
Yeah, and we see that, even in like movies and things of that nature, Mission Impossible-esque type movies or Ocean's 11, where they have these really secure systems, but they use a soft attack to actually get in, either employee impersonation, vendor impersonation of some sort, and using the end user as a gateway to get in rather than trying to beat the technology behind the security.
And we all know that the cost of regulatory compliance and security is ever increasing as we have to put in additional measures for, unfortunately, what's just the cost of doing business these days, but it's really necessary. But I think the best bang for the buck can be helping end users be more secure, and
Absolutely.
So that's what this is all about. And the awareness training is good. So regulatory compliance requires it on an ongoing basis, but it's good for small business and business in general and other organizations to take advantage of this, even if you're not regulated. It's just a good thing to do to reduce risk for the business. So why does this matter? The world is getting more digital. In fact, there's not a single bill that I don't pay online these days. So 100% of my personal bills and all of my finances, banking and all of that, I do online. And so, from just a personal standpoint for me, I'm completely digital in the way that I work with my finances. I'm sure that is true for a lot of the users out there, and increasingly businesses doing more and more online and in the cloud, especially. So the criminals are going to chase where the money and the value is. So the more the data and corporate information and credentials and things are online, then that's just a bigger target where the criminals are going to try to take advantage of that to monetize that information. And then, of course, as we talked about, if you're in a regulated industry, so finance, healthcare, DoD, other sectors like that, the regulatory requirements mandate that you do this, but it's also a good idea for other businesses as well. So why should you care? So again, we're all connected online, so we're all really a target, and I think that's the biggest takeaway for us individually as users is to understand it's not just the business, it's us individually. It's our personal information, it's our credentials, and so while maybe the business is the target, maybe it's our personal information or credentials that's the attack vector and the means that the criminal's using to try to access that information.
Yeah, and oftentimes, we think of hackers as, some guy in a closet with his laptop, but really these attacks are a lot more sophisticated these days. They're not really as targeted as they used to be. They're just trying to get any kind of information that they can monetize, whether it's you individually or your business. So, it just kind of raises the stakes for everybody who's connected to the internet.
Yeah, and then there's this whole thing, the dark web, where criminals kind of live and share and monetize, both the tools they use to attack companies and individuals, plus the information that's exfiltrated out of these systems is bought and sold on the dark web. And so it can be things like your email and password, but maybe you're using that same password combination somewhere else. And so it could be a personal account that's leaked, but they're able to take advantage of that, maybe to attack the business, for example. So fraud, identity theft, those are big things. Insurance fraud is a big thing in medical as well these days. So it's not just the business data, it's your personal information that's at risk.
And once they have that personal information, then they can just do internet searches to figure out more about you and more about who they're actually attacking.
So here's some threats that are out there. We probably heard a lot of these terms thrown around, and we'll dive in a little deeper on these, but phishing, spear phishing, I've heard the term whale phishing, I think, as well. So there's different phrases around that. But business email compromise, so that's the email account itself being hacked, maybe, and the credentials being leaked. Social engineering, so that's one that is applicable really across a broader spectrum. It's not just email attacks, it can be over the phone or in person as well, as we'll talk about. Malware, ransomware, viruses, those kind of things as well. And then fake websites that steal data and can infect devices. And I've seen some of those in trying to remediate these kind of attacks with clients, where I found fake Microsoft 365 looks like a login for 365, and it's actually a fake website. So those things are definitely out there and are a threat when they look like legitimate sites.
And even when the website's legitimate, you can have fake advertisements that are essentially doing the same thing, trying to get you to go to a compromised site.
So according to WebRoot's statistics, 1 in 50 URLs are malicious. So that's a pretty high number of all the website addresses out there, that 1 in 50 have some sort of virus or threat attached to them. And I was surprised by this, but 1 in 3 phishing sites use HTTPS to appear legitimate. So one of the things we'll talk about to look for in phishing attacks is whether that link address uses HTTPS, because the S means secure and encrypted. And but increasingly, the attackers are taking advantage of that and actually adding those security certificates to their websites to appear more legitimate. So the cat and mouse game kind of continues with attackers being a little more clever in how they're setting up these sites. And then also surprised to see that 90% of malware in business is delivered by email. So that's probably increased over time. It used to be things, I think, like USB drives and other things that you would see a lot of as well, but increasingly that's coming over email. So email security is especially important. And then breaches involving phishing and using stolen credentials. So that's another topic that we'll dive into a bit more. So some more stats. Just because you're a small business does not mean that you are not a target. And so while these statistics are a little dated, what it says to me is the increase in the risk has slowed down maybe a little bit for the larger businesses, and that's likely because they've invested heavily in security. And so while they are a big target, the growth in these attacks is in medium and small business. And so you can see in medium businesses, 50 to 249 employees, it's nearly doubled between 2018 and 2019. So I'm sure in 2021, it's even higher than that. And then small business, 1 to 49. So 47% of firms were targeted in the last 12 months. And I'm sure that stat is even higher now.
And that's probably a combination of just low-hanging fruit and just the ubiquity of attack now. They're not just going after the big whales of large banking institutions and things like that. They're just kind of spreading the net as wide and vast as they possibly can to get more traction.
Yeah, that's a good point. And so, another alarming statistic here is the average total cost of a data breach is now up to $3.92 million. So, we're talking high dollar for these breaches. And so reducing the risk to whatever degree we can do that through all the defense in depth strategies and security tools, but also hardening the user, as we're talking about today, can go a long way in minimizing those costs. And so this is really an industry-wide problem across all government and private business and nonprofits, education, just across the gamut. This is a high cost for doing business. And so part of reducing that cost is just to try to lower the risk and improve security, and definitely the end user is a component of that. So, but people know better, right? Well, maybe not. So 35% of workers who know they've been attacked don't bother to change their passwords afterward. So another interesting Webroot stat. And 49% of employees admit they've clicked links in messages for unknown senders during work. So my wife is a school teacher, and she's kind of my probably example of end user that loves to click on things. And so we have a lot of conversation about, yes, they may be offering some free thing online, but let's not click on that to try to get the free Chick-fil-A coupon or whatever it is. But I think we're all tempted to do that to varying degrees. And at least 49% are bold enough to admit that they've clicked on these kind of links. And then 2/3 of workers are sure that they've received at least one phishing email at work. So that's a pretty high percentage of us that I certainly have. And I'm probably most vulnerable to the UPS or FedEx shipping tracking. I have to keep up with my Amazon or whatever I have that I'm expecting to come in. And so when I see updates on shipping, that's I'm tempted to click on that link, but then I catch myself. So, but yeah, I think we all and these things are really crafted in a way that are tempting for people to want to click. So they're pretty clever.
Yeah, in a way, this slide kind of shocked me, but then as I thought about it more, you go by a doctor's office and you see people, employees standing out back smoking, and it's kind of like, okay, well, maybe, we just don't always take our best advice sometimes, but we certainly see it on this slide.
Absolutely. And so 40% of those who have received a phishing email say they didn't report it. So another interesting stat there. So if you see something, say something. That would be my motto when it comes to these things. If it looks funny, get IT involved or get somebody else involved to look at it before you click on it. So how does security awareness training help individuals? So again, at home, it's your personal information. That might be social security numbers. It might be username, passwords to your bank account, or just other personal information that you don't want out there. And by exercising these good habits, then you're reducing your own personal risk, and your home environment's going to be more secure, less likely to get viruses and malware on maybe your personal laptop or something. And then just keeping your family and yourself in general safe from hackers and spies. So at work, again, to the degree that we're all playing our part, we're helping lower risk for the business, and we can help prevent infections in the corporate network. We can stop business email compromise, and we can keep the business data safe. So why does this matter to business? As we talked about, there's a high cost associated with these breaches. So this is really just a risk management exercise for business. And what is the cost benefit of investing in security and doing training and all those things, investing in reducing risk, and what's the payoff? Sometimes the payoff is not having those breaches, and that's hard to measure, but we can see that the industry stats on that's high dollar when these things happen. And so we're reducing operating cost by reducing the risk, and that may be tough to measure, but we know that across all the industries that's happening. So we want to improve mindset and behavior. So that's just a cultural thing in business to be security minded, have a sense of shared security responsibility. So it's all of us that play a role in that, and to reduce over reliance on technology. Yeah, that's probably a tough one, just given how how invested we are in our technical systems, running our line of business applications and a lot of our business workflows. But it's good to have backup plans as well. And actually, our webinar next quarter in Q4 is going to talk about business continuity. So that's where that kind of comes into play. When all else fails and we do have these things, what's kind of the backup plan? And then just meeting the regulatory requirements. Again, if you're in government or banking, financial, medical, all those areas, then this is a must-do thing, and it's a cost of doing business in those areas. and then a return on security investment. So again, it's lowering that risk, lowering that cost of having these breaches, stronger security, higher productivity. That's a big thing, because when there's an attack, and maybe it's a crypto locker attack and ransomware, then we saw that with the Colonial oil pipeline not too long ago, where they were shut down for a week or so, I think.
A couple of weeks, yeah.
Having an attack, and so it can definitely affect the business just to restore operations after an event like that.
And really, training your users is probably the least expensive way to invest in your security posture overall.
Absolutely. So here's some of the regulated industries that require this sort of training. So we've kind of hit on those. PCI is pretty common in the retail area, so dealing with credit card transactions. A lot of us are familiar with HIPAA, just from either having to sign all of those HIPAA acknowledgments with our medical doctors, and then financial services as well, as we talked about. So military. So increasingly, more and more, I think industries are having to come out under some sort of regulated compliance. So this is, probably a case of let's go ahead and adopt these practices now, because it's coming for all of us in one way or another. For us as a IT business and being a managed service provider, and because we support financial, medical, all these different industry verticals, then we fall under the regulatory compliance for those as well. So just by nature of us supporting these industries, then we have to comply as well. So what results should I expect from a training program? So we talked about just reducing risk, so fewer infections, lowering cost because of user error, maybe clicking on that thing that we should click on and shutting our systems down. But we should see higher profitability and a higher return on investment. So as Michael pointed out, the lowest cost security investment is in user training. So best bang for the buck for all of us to improve our security practices and help the business reduce risk in that way. Lower support costs. So we can definitely see that in the businesses that we support, those that have a lot of these security tools and services in place and are doing a good job with end user awareness. We have fewer problems with these kind of incidents, and we've seen cases where we've had to support a email being compromised or something, and the help desk spends a good bit of time on resolving those issues and then working with the end user on remediation. So definitely lower support cost by doing this well. And then again, as we talked about, the end users, I said it's kind of the last line of defense, but you could look at it as the first line of defense. So just part of the security chain and defense in depth of the end user being part of the solution instead of part of the problem. Then general awareness and measurable progress. So can we quantify and measure the success of this kind of training over time? And there's certainly tools and ways to do that. And one of those is with tools that test for phishing, for example, in a business, and can send a report card basically for the organization of how many people clicked on that link, or maybe 100% knew and didn't click on it and got a good report.
And that's a good test for whether your security training is where it should be. So if you're shopping around for security awareness training, that's one of the questions you want to ask. Am I going to be able to have measurable progress on the state of user security awareness coming out of this and over time? Because you want to have it documented that you're progressing in those areas over time as well.
And then we've talked about compliance with best practices and regulations. So that drives a lot of why we do this. But ultimately, to achieve compliance is, a requirement for a lot of regulated businesses. But then again, for the broader industry, just reducing risk overall. So does security awareness training actually work? So again, can we measure the effort to see if there's a payoff on this? And so another WebRoot stat here, that after 12 months of ongoing phishing simulations and security awareness training, end users are 70% less likely to click through on a phishing message. So again, we can measure this and see that we're having a positive effect on end user behavior. That's the goal here. So let's do a deeper dive into some of the specifics on what we can do in terms of awareness and end user behavior that are applicable in our day-to-day work. And I think that the first is just to kind of understand that our data is valuable. And so the more we recognize what information the attackers are after and the value of that, then maybe we're a little more aware and conscious day to day when we're handling this information, the fact that we need to help keep it secure. But we talked about personal information and protecting that. So social security numbers, identity theft, those kind of things, driver's license, financial records, and then just personal contact information can be used. Maybe not for identity theft, but maybe it's leveraged in some sort of social engineering attack. So that's definitely something that we want to keep protected. And then PHI, so HIPAA regulation with medical data, and that would include anything that can associate you as a patient to the services or the diagnosis and medical condition maybe that's been diagnosed. And as we've talked about before, insurance fraud in medical is a big thing as well. So your insurance information being stored by the medical provider is also data that should be protected. And then any other kind of personal identifier. Intellectual property. So that's something that a lot of businesses deal with. Maybe it's trade secrets, product designs, things that give that company a competitive advantage in the market against the other businesses, and maybe it's process and methods. But all of that is valuable information and should be protected. And then we've talked about credentials for company and personal sites. So again, if we're using that same password or maybe variations of that password on a personal account and it's compromised, maybe that could be leveraged to help gain access to company credentials. And then one I find interesting for those of us that are on Facebook, and we get these different questions thrown up there to answer about ourselves, and they're fun and we want to participate and share information. What states have you traveled to and that sort of thing. But how many of those answers that we put on there are questions that might be security questions online? And so, what is your dog's name? So that's one I've actually used in the past and created a problem for my wife, because I had security question for what is my dog's name with my cable TV company at one time, and we didn't have a dog. And the dog's name wasn't the name of a dog that I ever had as a kid either. And so when my wife went to make a change on our account and they asked her that question, she was confused about why they'd be asking that. She said, well, we don't have a dog, but I don't use that any longer. But the dog's name was Rover, and I've never had a dog named Rover. But what high school did you attend? That's a pretty common one, and that's something that's easy to find on Facebook. And other questions about maybe your favorite book. I've seen what is your dream job actually used. So That one I'm familiar with as a security question. And then real common might be your mother's maiden name. Seen that one a lot as well.
Yeah, and that just helps guard against impersonation attacks where people are just trying to lead other people to believe that they're dealing with you and not, some malicious actor.
So social engineering. So this is something I think we're all vulnerable to in a variety of ways. And we talked about earlier that this can take the form of email, phone, and in person. And so, that's something we need to watch out for. I know in person, can be especially tricky because we want to trust people kind of by default. And so if someone shows up professionally dressed, maybe they've got a logoed shirt and they're carrying a router with them, and they look like they're from a local ISP, then it's probably easy to want to give them access to the server room because you want, again, trying to be helpful, and they need to change out the router or something. And then once an attacker gains access to your physical network and servers, then it's really, really hard to defend against that. And so, those in-person kind of scams can be especially tricky. Again, don't share personal information. So PII, PHI, all those things that can be leveraged in social engineering attacks. And then what information is publicly available. So I will sometimes Google to try to find contact information on people, and it's actually pretty easy to do. So you can try Googling yourself and see what you can find out about yourself, maybe to see how much of that information is getting out on the web. But all those things can be used for social engineering attacks. And then sharing your password, that's another one of those where we want to be helpful. And if you ever get an email or a phone call where maybe they're representing themselves as a tech and they're asking for your password, you really need to question that. So they shouldn't be doing that. There's other ways to support the end user without having access to the password. So email phishing, Michael, I know you've written an article on this year. So what are some things we need to look out for with email phishing attacks?
Yeah, so when you receive an email, and Charlie's right, earlier in the presentation we was talking about shipping notices and stuff. A lot of them look like a UPS email or a FedEx email or whatever. But generally you're looking for an attachment to an email that you weren't expecting. Maybe it even looks like somebody that but you weren't expecting. They haven't indicated to you that they were going to be sending you an attachment in any way. You want to look for just very generic wording. Maybe they don't know your name. They only know the first bit of your email. So if it's dear customer, or even if it's dear Miss last name or Mr. last name, you want to be looking for things like that. Generally, there's going to be some sort of urgency or fear mongering in the email to try to just drive you or scare you into a reaction that they're steering you towards. So urgency is another thing to look at. Poor grammar, it's not as indicative today as it has been in the past. They're getting smarter at how they're using Grammarly apparently and things of that nature to help them find their grammatical mistakes. But oftentimes you will see little grammatical errors, or you'll just see things worded in ways that just don't seem quite right. It doesn't sound like what normal people would say, maybe because it's being run through a translator or something like that. You also want to look at the links. If you highlight over the link, it'll kind of give you the URL that it's pointing to, and you want to kind of verify that if you do click on a link, that it is going to be sending you to the actual site that, if it's Microsoft, that it's Microsoft.com, FedEx.com, or UPS, whatever. You want to kind of double check that, and ideally you just go straight to the site and you don't even click on the link in the email. So those are some things to look for in terms of that. You just also, you want to make sure that in the URL itself that it does have that HTTPS, and basically all that's doing is, if it's taking you to Microsoft.com and has the HTTPS on there, that it's going to be checking an authenticator certificate to make sure that you're going to the actual verified site of Microsoft, and not redirected to some middle website where they're going to be able to take advantage of you.
Yeah, another point about the HTTPS is that also creates an encrypted connection between your browser and that server. And so that can or will eliminate the potential for what's called man-in-the-middle attacks. So people being able to sniff that traffic that's in between you and the server, perhaps, and maybe it's login information, and they're able to record a username and password that way. And but as we talked about before, increasingly these attackers are getting smarter, and they're starting to add the HTTPS, which means they're putting a security certificate on those servers to try to appear more legitimate. But to Michael's point, looking at the URL closely, so a common trick might be, instead of FedEx.com, it might say FedExCom.tw, or some other domain, and so it looks similar, but it's pointing to somewhere that's not legitimate. So I used to work for a law firm that had a practice of, anytime these suspicious looking emails came in, especially when they had attachments and links where there was a concern about the authenticity of that they would take a screenshot of the email and then send that to IT to look at. And so then IT would pay a visit and hover over the links, do all those kind of things that we're talking about here. But again, if you have any concern about an email before you open it, you may just want to check with IT. Certainly for our managed service clients, our help desk is available to help with those kind of things. And so when in doubt, just check with somebody. And then also, if you're trying to verify the authenticity of a communication, don't use the same channel that was used to contact you. Use a different channel. So don't reply to this email and say, "Hey, is this really you, Microsoft?" Or call the company maybe, and don't use don't use any contact information that's included in the email. So while this one doesn't have Microsoft's phone number, I would look up Microsoft's phone number somewhere else independent of this and call that number rather than calling what's on the email. And so we want to just use other means of communication to verify the integrity of this email.
And if you have an IT department or somebody who's acting as an IT department on behalf of your company, like a MSP, like the services that we would provide, really the best practice would be just to open a new email and drag the email in question and drop it into the body of that email. It'll actually create an attachment. And what that allows is, and then send it to your IT department or your MSP provider. And what that'll do is it'll allow your IT department to analyze the metadata, all the stuff that goes alongside that email, and allows us to trace where it came from, and really do some more in-depth. So simply forwarding that information doesn't get to us. So it's really not best to forward the email. It's best to just go ahead and drag it and drop it into a new email, and that way we have the tools to go in behind the scenes, look at all that metadata, and make a better determination of its legitimacy or illegitimacy, as the case may be.
Yeah, so we had a case that we dealt with, I think it was earlier this year, with a client whose email was, their password was compromised. So often attackers will use a brute force attack on a password, and we'll talk about passwords here in a minute. But they were able to access that user's mailbox and then send what are legitimate emails that actually came from that user's mailbox, but were including links and attachments to sites that were phishing and trying to get more user information. And when we started looking into that, we were able to use all that metadata that was in the attachment, and I actually opened the attachment in a data editor where it couldn't be detonated. So yeah, I didn't open a PDF in Acrobat or something where it would maybe execute the code in there, but I was able to evaluate and find the sites that it was trying to drive the users to, and I was able to work with the hosts of those websites to shut those sites down. And this went on for a period of time of this particular attack going on, but we were able to stay just a little bit ahead of the curve on shutting this thing down. And then now that company has anti-phishing security in place and other tools that they had not adopted previously that really stops that even before you get the email to begin with. So more of a preventive measure. But to Michael's point, having access to that metadata and everything that goes with that email is important information for IT to be able to track these things down and help stop them once they're in progress. So passwords are like underwear. So I found this graphic when I was preparing the slides and thought it was kind of funny. But I think the points are valid. So we should change them regularly. And don't know anyone that would leave their underwear on their desk, but don't, it's not a good idea. Nor is leaving your password out on your desk, and certainly don't loan them to anyone. That would not be a good practice. So we've talked about, don't share your password over the phone, even if it's someone that sounds like they're a tech or whatever. And I know you're just trying to be helpful, but ask if there's other means that can be used to accomplish the same thing without giving out your password. And so, Michael, you shared with me this morning some interesting information about the passwords with the length of password. So the difference between like an 8, 9, or 10 character password.
Right. So in an 8-character password, you're looking at, if you're just looking at uppercase and lowercase, you're looking at about 200 billion different possibilities there. When you factor in the uppercase, lowercase, numbers, and special characters, that grows to like 7.2 quadrillion. Just so there's this exponential growth. And then we've been recommending at least 8 passwords for almost 20 years now, and about 18 years or 19 years or so. And so really 8 is kind of the absolute minimum. Jumping to 9 can increase the time, from just a few seconds of being able to crack an 8-character password. A 9 could take 2.6 days to crack the password, and a 12 could take a host of years to even crack. But just because as you add just that one character, there's an exponential value to that. So really 8 should just be the absolute minimum, and 10 to 12 would really be kind of a good target for where you want to be in password length and complexity.
So probably it's probably been 15 years ago now, just as an exercise in cracking passwords. I downloaded some tools and tested it against a server to see, how vulnerable we were to these kind of attacks. And I was really amazed to find that, and this is back when Microsoft stored password hash values in a way that was less secure than it is today. They've definitely made improvements to make this more difficult. But at the time, the Microsoft would store basically a text string that could only be produced by that 8-character password combination. And so it was unique to each variation of password, but it would output only one string that would match that original password. And so you could download a set of files called rainbow tables, and it had pre-computed all possible variations on these hash values. And so to attack a server, you can have these rainbow tables and gain access to the hash value files, and then it does a lookup and finds the original password that creates that hash. Now, at the time, that was a very the file size to download these hash tables was very large, and download speeds were very slow, and it took a lot of effort to even set up that attack. But once you had all of that in place, you could gain access to server credentials, user passwords, in just seconds using these lookup tables. So, as computing power has increased, as internet bandwidth increases, it's easier and easier for attackers to crack these passwords. Fortunately, there's advances in operating system security and all the other things that antivirus and all the things that we put on these systems to help protect against this. But to Michael's point, there's an exponential increase in complexity to crack these by maybe just going from 8 to 9 characters or 9 to 10 characters. And then the more variation you use beyond just letters and numbers, if you start to use special characters, then that adds even more complexity to it. My problem is it's hard for me to keep up with all of these different combinations. And so, fortunately, my practices have evolved over the years, but I know there was a time, quite a while ago now, but all of my passwords, and this is whether I was using business systems or personal systems, but they were all kind of variations of just a few passwords. And so once you knew, just a couple of these, kind of the root element of the password, then I was adding numbers and symbols and things on top of that to make them unique. But there was a lot of commonality between those. And so I think the struggle for me and all of us is it's hard to remember all these passwords. And so the more complexity we add in our passwords, then those become harder to remember. I know a trick for me with passwords is maybe to replace letters with numbers. And so that helps to kind of create some variety. So instead of an E, use the number 3 or something like that. And then it becomes a little easier to remember, but you've created some variation besides just alphanumeric characters. So I don't know if you've got any tips, things you do maybe that helps you.
Yeah, generally, you generally want to try to get away from passwords that you remember and use some sort of tool that will generate passwords for you, and then kind of store those passwords and give you access to those passwords when you need them. But if you are still creating passwords, generally you want to choose something longer than one word. You don't, and you definitely don't want to choose dictionary words, and just create these maybe comical combinations of two things that don't seem to fit together, but in your mind create something that's memorable, but definitely taking advantage of numbers and special characters, because they greatly increase the complexity of the password and make it harder to attack. So yeah, it's good to choose complex passwords, but as many sites as I'm sure we all log into today, it'd be hard not to have some sort of shared value between the passwords for different sites. So we're almost at a place now to where the only real safe way to do it would be to use some sort of password manager, and let it just generate really complex passwords that you or anyone couldn't remember. Even if you saw them, you wouldn't be able to remember it. You'd have to, write it down or something. But that way, you're not having to recycle passwords, and because what'll happen is once on the dark web, once somebody has your credentials for one site, they're going to be testing it against various other sites in the hopes that you did have a shared password out there for, maybe it starts off as your email login, but they find that you're using the same email and password for your bank login, and then the sensitivity of the information just increases from there. So it's best to use some sort of password generating tool and manager to help you with those sites these days. Because I was just talking the other day with my wife Heather about the number of apps that people want to put on my phone, and you think about that, but you think about all these sites that you have logins to, and some of them, it's just been, restaurants and stuff. And so there's just no way that the human mind in today's world can keep up with passwords in that way without having to recycle them.
Yeah, I think that's well said, and it is a struggle, and something that I had struggled with for years until I started using, like Michael mentioned, a password manager, and I use LastPass personally, and I've used it probably, I don't know, it's a long time. I can't remember how long, but it's years and years I've used LastPass now, and so that's really solved the problem for me. And so I use a plugin in my browsers at work and at home with LastPass, and I also have it loaded on my smart devices, so my iPhone and my iPads, and I can use LastPass to log into any site. It'll autofill those credentials for me, and I don't have to remember my password. And so it keeps all your passwords kind of locked up into a vault that is more difficult to attack and that they protect. But then when you go to log in, it recognizes what site. If I'm trying to log into Microsoft, then it has my credentials stored that can be auto-filled into that login. And then that helps me because I can create really, really complex. So typically my passwords are, somewhere along the lines of 12 characters, and they're random, strings with numbers, caps, lowercase, and special characters. And so they're not recognizable words or anything certainly aren't vulnerable to like a dictionary attack, for example, because they're just completely random. And there's just no way that I could remember those and keep up with them. And so using a service like LastPass, Dashlane is another one that's out there. And I think you can start using these for free. And I know I pay for LastPass maybe like $5 a month or something for their premium service, but it's been invaluable to me and has helped solve this problem for me personally. And then another way that is increasingly used these days is two-factor or multi-factor authentication. So that just provides another layer of security on top of your password. And so maybe your passwords are a little easier to guess and not quite as secure, but you also have to put in a security code on top of that that helps protect that credential. So multi-factor or two-factor authentication is a combination of something you have, like your phone or a token, and then something like your password. And so that just adds one more thing. And then those codes that are generated, whether that's through a text message or through an app where you get those codes, those usually are only good for maybe up to 60 seconds before it generates another one. And so now you've narrowed the window of time that an attacker could try to gain access to a site, and added just one more degree of difficulty. And then you're getting that code again in a different form of communication than where your password is. So without having access to your phone, and maybe you get a text with that code, then it's impossible to gain access to that two-factor code.
Yeah, not too long ago, it seemed sci-fi to have biometric authenticators as well. But just about every one of us now has one in our pocket, either through facial recognition from our phone to a fingerprint reader on our tablet, phone, or laptop. And so that's another thing. You have what you know, what you have, and then who you are, what's unique to you as a person. And so those are ways that you can just add some complexity. Even if somebody knows your username and password, they still can't get to it because they don't have your phone, or they don't have those biomarkers that are unique to you.
Yeah, that's a good point. And that's really come a long way, the technology using biometrics. I know probably 10 years ago, there was, I think on a Microsoft login, I had the option with a laptop to use facial recognition. So that was quite a while ago. And my son Chaz was able to gain access with his face. So I knew that the technology was not as advanced as it needed to be, but it's certainly come a long ways in the last 10 years or so. And that's something I use on my iPhone now and trust it. And it's pretty secure. So I think it's a lot better than it used to be. And Chaz can not access my iPhone with his face. So that's a good thing. All right, well, why don't we move on to Wi-Fi and web browsing? So this is something that we all run into at some point or another. Of course, just web browsing. A lot of our applications are using web browsers these days as more and more apps move to the cloud. And then, we all use Wi-Fi from time to time, whether it's at home or when we're out and about. But I think some good practices here that we can adopt to ensure that we're secure with our wireless access and with our web browsing. So I pulled up a screenshot from my laptop where it's connected to our TCS admin network, and then also shows our TCS wireless, two different SSIDs there. But they both have the lock symbol next to the Wi-Fi symbol, which indicates that it's an encrypted, password protected wireless SSID. So that's one of the things you want to look for. If it's open, then it won't have that lock. And so when you go to connect to something, that's something to check. If you're at Starbucks or places like that, one of the attacks that people can use is to create a wireless network that looks like Starbucks. And so you might think you're connecting to their wireless, but you're really connecting to someone's hotspot that they've set up that looks like Starbucks. And that's easy to trick you into connecting to an unsecured wireless. And then they're able to potentially sniff your traffic and capture password logins and things. So I think the real kind of caution is, if you do use wireless that might be open, or you're using it in a public environment, to not log into your bank, to not log into maybe business systems where there might be sensitive data, and to do that only on secure networks. And VPNs are used increasingly to add security, and that's a way that we can ensure that the connection we are using, even if it's an open public wireless, that if we're using VPN maybe on our laptop to connect back to our office firewall, then that adds a layer of encryption and security on top of that. So there are ways to minimize risk if we have to work in that environment, and maybe it's just convenient and we want to, but there's secure ways to go about it as well. And then just for browsing, safe habits. One thing is, if you're using Google, which we all do, Googling is a verb now. It's so ubiquitous in our use of searching for things, but there's alternatives that don't track your search information, and so you may want to consider that. So I used to do IT support for a school system, and we had content filters and reporting that would log information about search topics and things to help us track what we needed to lock down. And it's amazing the things that teenagers will search for in a school. And so but there's safe ways to do that doesn't track that data. And DuckDuckGo is one of them that they make that claim to not track your personal information. And then using incognito mode, I think that term maybe is specific to Chrome.
Yeah,
maybe that's
Chrome.
I'm not sure what the other browsers call that, but all the browsers these days support some sort of mode where the browser itself will not record any of your activity. And so cookies, so those are files that are saved that mark what sites you've been on and track information to, and a lot of it's helpful. Like if you have a shopping cart on a website or something and you come back to that site, maybe that cookie helps to associate you with that shopping cart and what information you saved. So it can be helpful, but at the same time, maybe you don't want that information tracked. So pop-ups are a big problem. A lot of times those are a result of not being on a reputable site. So I think the key thing there is try to limit your website browsing to sites that you know and trust. And if you see a pop-up, the best thing to do is to close the browser and don't click on anything that's don't acknowledge the pop-up. Maybe it's prompting you to cancel or okay. Don't click either. Probably neither one are a good choice. Just close the browser and maybe open it back up, see if it goes away. And sometimes you'll get pop-ups that then kind of come back and that's when you know that there's something on your computer. Maybe it's a browser plugin that you've allowed to be installed, and now it's taken over some of the functionality and forcing these pop-ups. Of course, browsers these days have pop-up blockers. That's a helpful thing to help minimize that. But don't install things like coupon code plugins, those kind of things. When something is free on the internet, then probably what is being sold is you. So it's your information that's valuable, and so these free services, oftentimes it's used to collect maybe shopping habits and things from you that they then sell to other companies, and now they're able to provide targeted ads and things to you as a result of that browsing.
Most of the time they're slowing your browser down too, so they're just making your internet experience less enjoyable.
Yeah, definitely. And then don't download and install untrusted software. So again, this is where if you work with a IT company like TCS and you need something installed, just call the help desk and get their help, and they'll help make sure that it's something that's legitimate. And a lot of the freeware, things like that, can have malicious code in it and things that track your activity. So you want to avoid that and use commercial, professional, legitimate software. And by all means, don't try to download like free versions of Microsoft Office and things. That's just going to have problems when you do that. Not to mention just being in violation of the licensing agreements.
And to go back to public Wi-Fi, anytime that you're in a hotel or whatever, if you log in to their, even if it is secure, they're capturing data for analytics purposes, so that they can learn how their guests use the internet and what they're doing and those type things. And so my go-to, like last week, I was in Chicago with my wife, who was at a conference. And so I just worked from the hotel room while she was in the conference during the day. And I just use my hotspot. My phone is a hotspot. That's my go-to method. Of course, in Chicago, you're going to have great coverage, and stuff probably wouldn't work if you were visiting Montana or Wyoming or some place out in the middle of nowhere. But these days the cell service is fast enough to accommodate your browsing needs. I actually performed a Teams meeting from right there off my hotspot with full video and voice and everything, and it worked just fine. So that's just really the safest go-to when it comes to that. If you can add a VPN on top of that, that's just even better. But the more private you can be with that, I think the better for you in the long run.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, hotspots are definitely a more secure way to go than using public Wi-Fi, and certainly the coverage areas these days is much improved over the past, and so that's definitely a good alternative.
Yeah, a lot of people will think, well, I tried that, and then you ask them, well, how long ago was it you tried it? Well, 5 or 6 years ago. And the technology's come a long way in that amount of time.
Yeah, that's a good point. So here's another area that we're all, I think, vulnerable to, and that's physical security. And so, just things like foreign USB drives. So you see a USB drive in the parking lot, don't stick it in your computer. There's probably a reason that it's there, and it's not just because someone dropped it on accident. That could be an attack. And then just keeping a clean desk. So kind of like the underwear example, don't leave it on your desk. And just at the end of the day, any documents that you have, paper documents and things like that, make sure that you file them away or maybe just turn them over on your desk so they're not visible. But physical security is definitely a key component of reducing risk beyond our digital security. But shredding documents, that's important. So the trash is not a protected space from information, and so if you throw it in the trash, then it is open to whoever wants to dig through that and maybe gain information, and perhaps that can be used as a social engineering tag. Maybe it's just contacts or people that you interact with over email or something, but they're able to leverage that to create a more sophisticated attack. And so just information leakage here and there can be put together to create a more complex attack. So that's something we need to be aware of. And then simple things like locking your screen when you walk away from the computer. If you have a Active Directory Windows network, then you can set up a policy on the server that forces everyone's screen to lock after a period of time. But a good practice, even without that, is just lock your screen when you walk away. And something I try to do, I'm not 100% consistent in that, but I try to be. And so, just make it a habit when you do that, lock it. And that is going to protect your computer and access to your files from within the office.
And the easiest way to do that is just to use the Windows L combination on your keyboard. As you're standing up, just Windows L, and that way you don't have to wait for the timeout. And I'll also say that, from a hacker's perspective, the only thing that they would consider bad information is incorrect information. Any accurate information is information that they can eventually use against you. And so the least amount of information that you can share with those malicious actors, the better.
Absolutely. And definitely don't leave your laptop out in visible areas. So just this past weekend, there were a number of break-ins to cars in my neighborhood, and actually saw some Ring video of one of the homes where they did not break in, and but they did have flashlights and were looking into the vehicles and checked the doors to see if they were unlocked. And apparently there was nothing valuable in plain sight in those cars, and the doors were locked, and so they didn't break in to those particular cars, but other areas they did break in. And so I have a previous coworker years ago that had his corporate laptop stolen from his truck, and it was just a few minutes of running in somewhere and coming back out, but in those few minutes having it just in a visible location in the truck, someone broke in and stole the laptop. But fortunately in that case the hard drive was encrypted, and so that's a safeguard. And if you're using HIPAA compliance or some of the other regulated compliance, one of the requirements is to encrypt your data. And so having your hard drives encrypted is definitely a safeguard. And so the physical device maybe is stolen, but they can't access the data. Locking your server room or having your equipment stored in a lockable cabinet. So again, if someone gains physical access to your network, then that is a huge vulnerability. And so having those devices locked up where someone can't just come in and gain access to it without being assisted, and given access to that just further protects. And maybe it's a social engineering type of thing, and someone walks in with with a Cox shirt or something on, and they've got a cable modem that they need to replace. Well, if you're standing with them while they're doing it, and and escorting them and that sort of thing, and also verifying the identity of that person, that's a good thing to do. So you just call back to the office and check and say, hey, what ticket number are you working on, and verify that with the support number maybe, and just prove their identity and that they're actually with the company. That's another kind of safeguard. But access control cards, and one problem I think for businesses is not having a good offboarding procedure. And so we maybe have all these things, access control cards and laptops with encryption, but if we don't offboard an employee properly, maybe some of these things walk out the door with the employee. I know I dealt with one case where a high-level manager was fired, and he actually stole the corporate laptop when he left. And if it weren't for the inventory control and some of those measures, we also had our management tool loaded on that laptop where we could see the IP address and the location of that device when it came back online. And so we were able to provide evidence for where that person had moved to and taken the laptop. But having a good offboarding procedure can help minimize those kind of problems to ensure that you've collected all these devices when a person's been terminated.
And even if you have an offboarding procedure, this would be a good reminder to go back and just check and make sure it's up to date. You may have adopted new tools. You may have, added new things, new devices that your employees have that they didn't have before, things of that nature, just to make sure that everything's up to date and that you're not overlooking anything, because all it takes is that one little thing that's overlooked. And some of these things are inconvenient. They can even be awkward at times. You're walking around with this stranger while they do their work and feel like you're kind of peering over their shoulder or whatever. But you got to do them these days, and it's just one of those things that it's kind of a normal state of doing business that we have to adopt and accept in order to protect our businesses and protect our personnel.
Yeah, that's a good point. So another tip would be to orient your monitors in a way that they can't be seen. So that's actually a requirement for HIPAA compliance, for example, that your screens aren't visible. And then also things like just the physical space of not being able to overhear sensitive information. Maybe when someone is signing in somewhere that people aren't able to overhear that. That's something common in medical. And then having sign-in logs for visitors is a big thing too. So do we have the verification of who came in, what time they came in, and when did they leave, and can we back that up with our documentation?
And there are things like in the healthcare space where you can have a business associate agreement and things like that in place to where once they've signed that, then they're an accepted vendor. They've signed a non-disclosure agreement and things that go along with giving them the ability to do their work without you having to babysit them. But for those who aren't in that category, like just a random Cox guy or Hargray personnel coming to check on a modem or things like that, those are the ones that you really have to check up on and make sure they do actually represent the company. They have been dispatched by Hargray or Cox to be there for a specific mission, and that they are who they say they are. So those are some things that you want to keep in mind as well.
Yeah, and even if it's a TCS employee and you haven't seen them before, then call here and verify that, maybe we've hired somebody new and there's a new face, but that's why we collect shirts when we offboard. We don't want those logos walking around, and I'm sure other ISPs and other companies do the same sort of thing. And so, but it's always good to check whoever it is. If you're not familiar with them, then just take a minute, make a phone call, and verify their identity and why they're there. It's just a safe thing to do.
And it's a good way to bring a smile to our face because we'll know you're listening.
That's a good point. So that pretty much wraps up our content for the webinar today. And hopefully this is useful information. And again, just adopting some or all these practices will help your business, help just with your protecting your personal information. So, let's all take part in being a line of defense for security and helping reduce risk. And, we're going to be more productive collectively and have safer businesses and, fewer problems with downtime and computers running slow and all these things. So we'll be more efficient and lower the cost of doing business for all of us, which is in all of our best interest to do just by adopting a few best practices around security. And this is a good topic to revisit on some cadence, at least annually, if not more regularly than that. But just to keep this front of mind, maybe when you have a new employee that comes on board, to have them go through this information as part of their onboarding. That'd be a good way just to get someone up to speed quickly on the security culture that you have in your business and how they can be part of the solution and not part of the problem. And that just takes all of us working together to do that. So, if you haven't seen our other webinars from earlier this year, certainly encourage you to check those out. We put these on YouTube, and we have online content. Michael and I are committed to writing original content. So he and I tag team, several times a quarter to release new blog articles that you can find at www.choosetcs.com/resources. So that's a place to go to get the latest and greatest. And then we share those out on social media and email mailing list as well. But check out our other webinars from Q1, Turning Your Business Inside Out, Endpoint and Application Security, again, keeping on that security topic. And then next quarter, date to be determined, but we're expecting to have one of our vendors participate in that. Again, as we have in previous quarters, but business continuity or else. So we will talk about having a good business continuity strategy, why that's important to business, and also touch on disaster recovery. So that's just a big topic to help businesses stay afloat and stay operational through some of these events. Thinking back again to like the Colonial Pipeline incident, what contingencies were in place to help mitigate that and get it back up and running. But that's something that is important for all businesses to have a strategy in place for that. So
if you'd love to dive deeper on any of these topics, please let us know. We'd love to have that conversation. And also we'd value your feedback. If there are things that we could do better or things that you feel are missing, we'd love to address those as well. So we appreciate the time and look forward to next time.
So as always, we want to express our thanks primarily to our clients. You all are the reason we do this and the reason we have an opportunity to do this. And so without our business partners, we would not be able to do this. And so we're happy to do this. And like Michael said, we're more than happy to have one-on-one or, if you want to bring us in to, expand on these things with your staff, we're happy to do that. We're here to support in any way we can. and security is something near and dear to our hearts. And so we want to take advantage of every opportunity we have to for us to work together on improving that. And that's good for all of us. So again, thank you to all of our clients, and again, tune in Q4 for continuation of our education series this year for business continuity or else. Thank you all, and hope you have a great day.